The first thing I saw was her face. Not in person, not even on a video call, but in a grainy, low-light photograph sent to my phone. At 10:43 on a Tuesday night, my phone buzzed twice, the screen lighting up the dark corner of my living room where I'd been half dozing after a 14-hour shift on base. The message had no words, just the picture. My grandmother, alone, sitting on a hard wooden bench at the town bus station. Her small frame was hunched under a frayed coat, her hands clutching her purse like she was holding on to the last thing she owned. An empty paper coffee cup sat at her feet, likely something she'd bought hours ago to stay warm. Behind her, the station looked deserted, not a soul in sight. The wall clock was frozen at 9:17 p.m. It was winter, the kind where your breath freezes before you can see it. I could almost feel the cold biting through her clothes, through her bones. And then I noticed something else. Her expression wasn't sadness, it wasn't confusion, it was resignation, as if she'd stopped expecting anyone to come for her, as if she'd decided she would just sit there until she couldn't anymore. The next text came seconds later from a number I knew too well. My cousin, Eula. Thought you should know. Your parents left her here, said they can't take care of her anymore. I read it 3 times before the words actually made sense. My parents left my grandmother, the woman who had practically raised me, at the bus station like an unwanted package and just drove away. My heart hammered in my chest. A heat rose behind my eyes, but it wasn't tears, it was fury. I typed back instantly. Where are they now? Eula replied, home. They said, Grandma stays here until she figures something out. We don't want her back in the house. I breathed out, slow and steady, the way they teach you before a mission. Except this wasn't a drill. This was family. My parents had always been complicated. They weren't the warm, nurturing type. Not to me, not to my siblings, and certainly not to my grandmother. But this wasn't just coldness. This was cruelty disguised as practicality. I glanced at the clock, 10:47 p.m. I could have gotten in my truck, driven the 40 miles to the station, picked her up quietly, and left. That's what any reasonable person would have done. But I didn't feel reasonable. I felt surgical, calculating, military. You see, I'm not just any granddaughter, I'm a Navy SEAL. And when SEALs move, we don't just show up. We make a point. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a group chat labeled The Crew. These were my brothers and sisters in arms, the people who had pulled me out of firefights, who trusted me with their lives and had earned mine in return. Need a quick assist, civilian recovery, 0 hostile threat but high symbolic value, I typed. The first reply came in under 10 seconds. Where and when? I sent the picture of my grandmother, then the address of the bus station. By 10:52 p.m. I had my answer. 5 Humvees, a full squad, kitted out. We'd roll out in 20 minutes. I put on my dress blues, not my camo, not combat gear, but the dress uniform, the one you wear for graduations, funerals, and moments when you need the world to know exactly who you are. The medals lined up on my chest weren't just metal, they were proof. Proof that I had fought harder, endured more, and survived what most people couldn't imagine. Tonight, I wasn't just going to get my grandmother. I was going to show my parents and this entire town exactly what they had done. By the time I walked outside, the night air cut sharply at my skin, but the low rumble in the distance comforted me in a way nothing else could. Headlights, engines. The convoy was arriving. The first Humvee pulled up, tires crunching on the frozen gravel. Then another and another. Soldiers jumped out, their boots hitting the ground in perfect sync, forming a perimeter without a word from me. I climbed into the lead vehicle. To the bus station, I said. We moved like a blade through the darkness, and I knew that before the night was over, my parents would regret every second of what they had done. To understand why I reacted the way I did that night, you have to understand who my grandmother is and what she means to me. Her name is Cora. Everyone calls her Cora, but to me, she's always been Grandma. She's 78 years old. She's sharp as a tack with a wit so quick it could slice a man in half before he knew he'd been cut. She's the reason I can stand on my own 2 feet and, paradoxically, the reason I ever put on a uniform in the first place. When I was a kid, my parents weren't exactly present. Dad was always chasing some business venture that usually failed before it started. Mom, she was more concerned with country club politics than actual family. It was Grandma who packed my school lunches, patched my torn jeans, and sat through every single piano recital, even the ones where I butchered the notes so badly the teacher winced. She's the one who told me, "Honey, your strength isn't about being loud, it's about refusing to break." Those words carried me through Bud S training when every muscle in my body was screaming to quit. But to my parents, she was an inconvenience. They saw her old age as a burden, a reminder of obligations they didn't want. They never said it out loud, but the way they sighed when she asked for help, the way they relegated her to the smallest guest room, I knew. Still, I thought they had some basic decency. I thought there were lines they wouldn't cross. That illusion shattered 3 months before the bus station incident. Grandma had a fall in her kitchen. Nothing catastrophic, but she needed a few weeks of physical therapy. I was deployed overseas at the time, so I called my parents and pleaded with them to check on her daily. They promised they would. They didn't. By the time I got back stateside and drove to her house, the place was a mess. She'd been living on canned soup and saltine crackers because no one had bothered to get her groceries. Her laundry was piled in a corner. She tried to downplay it. "Oh, I'm fine, dear." But I saw the truth in her eyes. That was my first breaking point. I confronted my parents right then and there. They shrugged. They said she's stubborn, she won't accept help. They never offered any. That's when I started visiting my grandmother twice a week, no matter my schedule. I'd fix her leaky faucet, bring her fresh produce, drive her to her therapy appointments. I thought maybe I could balance things out, but my parents didn't like that. They saw it as me interfering in their decisions. I didn't care, until one afternoon when Mom said something that chilled me to the bone. "You'll understand when you have to manage someone like her. It's exhausting. Sometimes you just need to step away." Step away. She was talking about her own mother. Fast forward to the night of the photograph. I had been on base all day, running a training operation with my squad. I got home exhausted, nuked a frozen dinner, and was about to crash when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. Almost. When I opened that message and saw my grandmother on that cold bench, it was like every ounce of patience I ever had for my parents evaporated. I didn't need details. I didn't care about their reasoning. I knew this was intentional. They didn't leave her there by accident. They wanted her out of sight, out of mind. And here's the thing. When you've served in the military long enough, you develop a sixth sense for a mission's urgency. You know when something can wait until morning and when it can't. This was the latter. I could have just picked her up, brought her to my place, let the whole thing fade quietly into the background. But that would have sent the wrong message. I wanted my parents, and anyone else who thought you could treat family this way, to feel the weight of their actions. That's why I didn't just drive there. That's why I called the crew. That's why I decided this wasn't just going to be a recovery, it was going to be a statement. As the Humvees rolled through the sleeping streets, I pictured my grandmother's face when she saw us coming for her. I pictured the look on my parents' faces when they heard the engines outside their house later that night. And for the first time in years, I felt something like peace, because I knew that by the end of this night, they would understand exactly who they were dealing with. I keep my personal and professional lives separate, most of the time. My teammates know me as Ellis, the one who doesn't crack under pressure, the one who volunteers for the nastiest missions without blinking. But that night, I brought them into something personal. I sent one group text, "Need vehicles and people. 30 minutes, no questions asked. Non-lethal op." They didn't hesitate. That's the thing about SEALs. When one of us calls, the others answer, no matter what. 10 minutes later, my phone was buzzing with confirmations. By the time I got to the motor pool, 5 Humvees were already idling under the sodium lights, exhaust smoke curling into the night air like smoke from a dragon's nostrils. I climbed into the lead vehicle. My squad leader, Torres, was already in the passenger seat. He glanced at me. Ellis, you're bringing a convoy? For what, exactly? I looked straight ahead. Family matter. Torres raised an eyebrow but didn't push it. He knew me well enough to know when not to ask. We didn't load live rounds. This wasn't about intimidation by force. It was about presence. The simple, undeniable sight of 5 military vehicles rolling into the suburbs would make the point for me. On the way out, I grabbed blankets, a thermos of hot tea from the mess hall, and one of those thick, military-issue parkas for my grandmother. My mind kept replaying that photo. The dim streetlight above her, the bus station bench, her hands clasped in her lap as if trying to make herself small. She didn't even look sad in the picture. She looked resigned. That was worse. We roared off the base in formation, the engines a low-end rumble. I sat in the passenger seat, my helmet on, scanning the road. I had run night missions in hostile territory, but this felt different. The stakes weren't national security. They were her. 20 minutes later, we pulled into the bus station parking lot. It was almost midnight. The place was empty except for one flickering light above the bench and her. Grandma was sitting exactly as she was in the picture, except now her little flowered suitcase was beside her. She looked up when she heard the engines, squinting against the glare of the headlights. I jumped out before the vehicle came to a full stop. Grandma. Her face softened in recognition, then furrowed into a frown. What in the world? I wrapped her in the parka and poured her some tea. She didn't resist, but she kept looking at the line of Humvees behind me, the silhouettes of seals standing at ease. Honey, what is all this? Extraction, I said simply. She let out half a sigh, half a laugh, shaking her head. You always did have a flair for the dramatic. But I could see her shoulders relax. For the first time, she wasn't alone. She was surrounded, protected. I helped her into the lead Humvee myself, making sure she was comfortable. She kept trying to tell me she was fine, that she didn't want to cause any trouble. I didn't answer. My jaw was tight. Torres leaned over. What's next? I looked past him, down the dark road leading to my parents' neighborhood. We make one stop. The drive there was surreal. The quiet suburban streets I had ridden my bike on as a child now echoed with the low, steady roar of military engines. Curtains twitched. Porch lights flicked on. People peered through their blinds as the convoy rolled past. When we turned onto my parents' street, all the lights in their house were off. I told the drivers to park in formation, blocking the road. The sound alone, 5 Humvees shutting down in sync, was enough to wake the neighborhood. Neighbors came out onto their porches in their pajamas, whispering. I left my grandmother in the Humvee with 2 teammates. Then I walked up the driveway. My boots crunched on the gravel. I didn't knock softly. I gave 3 hard raps that rattled the door. Lights came on inside. After a pause, the door cracked open, my father's voice sleepy and irritated. Do you have any idea what... He stopped when he saw me. Then he looked past me at the vehicles, the uniforms, the silent crowd of operators on his street. What the hell is this? He asked, his voice getting sharper. I stepped back, just enough for him to see the Humvee behind me and Grandma sitting inside, sipping tea. His face went pale. You left her at a bus station, I said. It wasn't a question, not an accusation. It was a statement. For a long moment, he didn't answer, just stood there in his bathrobe, staring at me, then at the convoy, then back at me. Get dressed, I said, my voice low. You're coming outside. He didn't move. That's when I took a step closer, so close he had to lean back. You're going to walk down that driveway and you're going to stand in front of her and you are going to explain yourself in front of all these witnesses, the neighbors, the squad, the town that will be talking about this for years. He knew I wasn't bluffing. The door stayed cracked open for a good 10 seconds. I could see the war going on inside my father's head, pride versus fear, control versus exposure. He had built his life on keeping family matters private, on maintaining a facade. Now that facade was about to be crushed under the headlights of 5 military Humvees. I stepped back, letting the cold night air flow between us. Dad, I said calmly, the longer you stand there, the more you're telling this entire neighborhood what kind of man you are." His jaw tightened. Behind him, my mother appeared, adjusting her robe, her eyes darting from me to the street. She looked like she wanted to slam the door and pretend none of this was happening, but she couldn't. Not with Grandma watching from inside the lead Humvee, and not with 24 neighbors already gathered on their lawns. My father muttered something to my mother, then stepped inside. I heard drawers opening, the rustle of clothes. My mother stood there, wringing her hands. "You didn't have to do this." "Yes," my voice cut through the night. "I did. She sat alone at a bus station in the dark because you decided she wasn't worth the drive home." Her eyes flickered with guilt, but only for a moment. Then the familiar mask slipped back into place. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "Then come out here and explain how it was," I said. The door closed. A minute later, my father came out, now in jeans and a sweater. He looked smaller, somehow. His posture was stooped, though his eyes still had that hard edge. We walked down the driveway together, the buzz of hushed conversations probing from across the street. The Seals stood like statues, arms crossed, watching without expression. The neighbors made room as we approached the Humvee. Grandma watched from the window, her teacup in her hand. When she saw him, she set it down slowly, her hands resting in her lap. I opened the Humvee door. "Come on out," I said softly. "You should hear this in the open." She hesitated, looking between us, but she climbed down carefully. The cold bit at her cheeks. She stood under the streetlight with that same flowered suitcase by her side. "Tell her," I said to my father. He cleared his throat, his gaze sliding away from hers. "It wasn't safe for you at the house. We thought—" I cut him off. "Tell her the truth. You didn't want to deal with her. You wanted her out of your way." A murmur went through the crowd. My father shot me a sharp look, but I didn't flinch. My grandmother's voice was quiet, but it carried. All I wanted was to spend Christmas with my family, my own son. His jaw flexed. "You wouldn't have been comfortable." She gave a small, sad smile. "Comfort isn't the point, is it?" I stepped forward. "This ends tonight. You are going to acknowledge what you did, and you are going to apologize. Right here, right now." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. His eyes darted to the Humvees, the Seals, the neighbors, the smartphones that were undoubtedly recording. For a man obsessed with reputation, this was the nightmare scenario. When he remained silent, I gave a slight nod to Torres. The Seal moved, not threateningly, but unmistakably present. The sound of boots on asphalt was deliberate, timed, a language my father understood all too well. Finally, his shoulders sagged. "Mom, I'm sorry." The words sounded like they'd been pulled from his chest with pliers. Grandma's eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once. "Thank you for saying it," she murmured. Then turning to me, "Can we go now, dear?" I helped her back into the Humvee. The mission was half over, but my pulse was still hammering, because this wasn't just about picking her up. It was about showing them, and everyone watching, that the days of quietly sweeping things under the rug were over. I turned back to my parents. "She's coming with me, and if you ever try anything like this again, I won't just bring a convoy, I'll bring the press." No one spoke. The Seals climbed back into the Humvees. The engines roared to life. The convoy pulled away from the curb, leaving my parents standing alone under that streetlight, the entire neighborhood watching them. In the rearview mirror, I saw them shrink into the distance, two figures in the cold, surrounded by whispers they would never escape. But I wasn't done. Not yet. By morning, the video was everywhere. Someone in the crowd had live-streamed the entire confrontation. It spread like wildfire, from local Facebook groups to regional news stations. By breakfast, my phone was buzzing with messages from reporters asking for comment. I ignored them. I had a different stage in mind. At 10 a.m., I drove Grandma to the town hall. She wore a crisp wool coat and a scarf I'd bought her years ago, sitting straight-backed in the passenger seat of my truck. The convoy of Humvees didn't follow us. This time, I didn't need them for intimidation. The damage was already done. Inside, The place was bustling. Town council members shuffled papers. The mayor glanced at his watch. When I walked in, the murmurs started immediately. People had seen the video, they knew. I had called ahead, requesting to speak during the public forum. When my name was finally called, I walked to the podium with my grandmother by my side. "This is my grandmother," I began, my voice steady but audible. 3 nights ago, she was left alone at a bus station in the cold for hours by her own son and daughter-in-law. There were small gasps in the room. My parents were sitting in the back row, my mother's arms crossed tightly, my father pretending to study the floor. "She is 83 years old," I continued. "She raised 3 children, worked 2 jobs, and never turned her back on family when they needed help. And this is how she is repaid." Grandma's hand rested lightly on my arm, but she didn't speak. I could feel the weight of her silence, a kind of permission to press on. "Family isn't just about blood," I said, scanning the room. "It's about showing up. It's about respect. And it's about never, ever abandoning someone who gave you everything." The mayor shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not sure what." "I'm not here for sympathy," I cut him off. "I'm here for accountability. My parents own a local business, they sit on committees, they smile for pictures at charity events. But when no one is looking, they left my grandmother to fend for herself at a bus stop in freezing temperatures." My father's face reddened. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. "This town prides itself on community," I said. "So I'm asking, do we mean it? Or is it just a slogan on the welcome sign?" The room was silent save for the low hum of the heating system. I stepped away from the podium, but I didn't sit down. I stood next to my grandmother in the center of the room, letting the silence build. I knew how to use silence, the way it forces people to confront the weight of what's been said. After a long moment, the mayor cleared his throat. "On behalf of this council, we condemn the treatment of Mrs. Ellis. This is not who we are as a community." He looked toward my parents. "Do you have anything to say?" My father's jaw worked. He looked at my mother, then at the cameras. Yes, the local news had shown up, drawn by the viral video. He finally stood up. "I apologize to my mother and to the community. It was a mistake. It won't happen again." I didn't smile. I didn't let him off the hook. "It wasn't a mistake," I said quietly, but loud enough for the microphones to catch it. "It was a choice." The words landed like a stone in still water, ripples of discomfort spreading through the room. As we left, people stopped us in the hall. Old friends of Grandma's, strangers who'd seen the video. They shook her hand, patted her shoulder, told her she deserved better. Outside, under the pale winter sun, she looked at me with a small, tired smile. "You didn't have to do all this," she said. "Yes," I told her. "I did, because they'll forget if no one reminds them." She didn't answer right away. Then she said softly, "They'll remember now." But I wasn't finished. The public apology was a start, not the end. The headlines weren't going to fade away quietly, and I had one more move to make, one that would ensure they never tried to erase her again. 2 days after the town hall, the story had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a local family dispute. It had become a talking point about elder abuse, respect, and what it means to protect your own. Morning radio hosts debated it. A state senator tweeted about it, and my parents were getting calls they didn't like, from business partners, committee chairs, even old friends who didn't want to be seen standing next to them. I could have stopped there. The apology was on record. The town had seen them humbled, and Grandma was safe. But I kept thinking about that picture, the one of her sitting alone at the bus station, the way her hands were clasped in her lap, the way her coat looked too thin for the cold. That image had been burned into my memory, and I wanted to make sure it was burned into theirs too. That's why I called in one last favor from my unit. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, my parents' street filled with the deep, rumbling roar of diesel engines. Not one Humvee this time, or even 5, but 3 Humvees and 2 massive military transport trucks. No guns, no intimidation, just presence. We parked along the curb in a perfect line. Uniformed Navy SEALs stepped out, not armed, but in their dress blues. Each one carried something in their hands. At the center of the formation, I walked forward with my grandmother on my arm. She wore the same scarf from the town hall, and for the first time in weeks, her hair was done the way she used to like it, neat and dignified. My parents were already standing on their porch, confusion written on their faces. Neighbors peeked through their curtains. Some even stepped out onto their lawns. When we stopped at the foot of the driveway, I turned to the men and women behind me. In perfect sync, the SEALs fanned out, 3 on either side of us. Then, on my signal, they turned to face my parents. "This," I said, my voice echoing on the quiet street, "is the family my grandmother deserved the night you left her at that bus station. This is the respect you refused to show her." One by one, the SEALs walked forward and placed their items on the driveway. A folded blanket, a thermos of hot tea, a pair of warm gloves, an umbrella, a flashlight, a handwritten note that read, "You are never alone." I could see my mother's throat work, her eyes jumping to the neighbors, the cameras, the growing crowd. My father's hands were shoved deep in his pockets, but I saw the twitch in his jaw. "Grandma doesn't need your money," I said, looking at them both. "She doesn't need your approval. What she needs, what she has always deserved, is your presence, your respect. And when you failed to give it, others stepped in." I stepped closer, my boots crunching on the driveway. "You can't erase what you did. You can't take back that night. But you can remember it. Every time you see these things," I gestured to the driveway, "you will remember exactly who had to show up in your place." The SEALs turned sharply back toward the street, but before they left, I gave one final command: honor. In unison, they dropped to one knee on the pavement before my grandmother. Not for me, not for the show, but for her, the woman who had survived a Depression-era childhood, raised a family, worked until her hands ached, and still had kindness left to give. The street was silent except for the sound of someone's phone recording video. Then I took Grandma's hand, helped her into the lead Humvee, and we drove away. I didn't look back, but I knew they were still standing there, my parents watching the convoy disappear with the eyes of the entire neighborhood on them. They would never admit it out loud, but I knew that image, that moment. They would never forget it, and that was the point. The videos hit the internet before we even got back to Grandma's house. Someone had filmed the whole thing, the convoy rolling down the street, the SEALs forming up, the gifts being placed on the driveway, the moment they took a knee. By the time I helped Grandma inside, my phone was vibrating nonstop. By nightfall, the video had over 1 million views. The comment section was flooded with strangers from all over the country, veterans, grandchildren, even nurses who worked in elder care. Some were angry on Grandma's behalf. Some shared their own stories of neglect and family betrayal, and some just said, "This is how you honor someone who raised you." The local news anchor called for an interview. The national media picked it up. It wasn't about shaming my parents anymore. It had become a conversation about dignity, duty, and what families owe the people who made them. Grandma didn't care much for the attention. She'd laugh and say, "I'm too old to be famous." But I saw her sit up a little straighter, smile a little more often. The light in her eyes came back. She started baking again, and on Sundays she'd hum the old songs she used to sing while cooking when I was a child. My parents didn't speak to me for weeks, but I know they saw the headlines. I know they heard the whispers at church and the country club. They wanted to keep things quiet. I had made sure the world knew instead. A month later, I got a letter. It wasn't from them, not directly. It was from my mother's sister. She wrote that they were reconsidering some things, that maybe they had lost sight of what family is supposed to be. I didn't write back. Not yet. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. Instead, I focused on Grandma. We took drives down the coast. We sat in the backyard drinking tea on cool afternoons. I even brought her to the base one day, introduced her to the unit. She laughed when one of the younger SEALs asked if she'd ever considered joining the Navy. And here's the thing. I didn't do all of this just to punish my parents. I did it because I wanted Grandma to see, to feel, that she was worth fighting for, that no matter who failed her, she would always have someone ready to stand up, show up, and protect her. Looking back, I realized that day at the bus station could have gone very differently. If I hadn't checked my messages, if I hadn't made those calls, if I'd let my parents' words, "Grandma stays here," or "she's fine," chart the course. But I didn't. Because when someone you love is left out in the cold, you don't just drive by. You turn around, you go back, you make it right, and you make damn sure the people responsible remember exactly why they will never get the chance to do it again. For anyone listening to this, maybe you have your own bus station moment buried somewhere in your memory. Maybe it wasn't about a grandparent. Maybe it was a friend, a neighbor, someone who once stood by you when no one else did. If that person is still here, call them, visit them, show up. Not because the world is watching, but because that's what decent people do. And if someone in your life has forgotten how to honor those who came before them, well, remind them, loudly if you have to. Because respect isn't something you ask for, it's something you give. And sometimes, it's something you fight for. This is my story. That was my grandmother. And this was the day the whole world remembered her name.